4:30 having come and gone, we'll call to order the Finance Committee meeting of Monday, September 16th, 2024, and ask Dave to please call the roll.
Council President Figueroa Cole.
Here.
Alder Revere.
Here.
Alder Curry.
Here.
Alder Madison. Alder Evers.
Alder Evers.
Alder Rummel.
Present.
Alder Evers. I still can't hear you. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Okay, well, Mary of quorum.
Thank you. Perhaps we can get Alder Evers some tech help. But in the meantime, Alder, give us a high sign if you are wanting to say something. All right, so we have our regular meeting plus our budget hearing tonight. So we will start in with the regular meeting. And then just as a reminder, we'll be giving presentations from a set of agencies today and taking questions on those. And then the second set of agencies will go tomorrow. Tomorrow, we will not have a regular meeting nor any public comment. So whatever public comment we have would be tonight. I don't think there is any. And then after these meetings, we will be referring the capital budget forward to when the Finance Committee will have a chance to introduce amendments if so desired. Just a high level on process. So just give me a sec to get all my screens in order here. Sorry, folks. Is in fact the 16th. We have no general public comments. So are there any disclosures or recusals on tonight's agenda? Seeing none. Then we'll move on to the consent agenda. We will obviously exclude the capital budget briefings and the budget itself. Are there any other items that alders would like to have excluded from the consent agenda at this time? Alder Verveer?
Thank you, Mayor. I have a request as it relates to the human resources related items on the agenda, but I don't have any specific questions, Mayor, about those items or objection to those items. What's your recommendation? Could we
handle that once we have a motion on the consent agenda?
That sounds perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. So are there any other items that alders would like to have separated from the consent agenda at this time? If not, then President Figueroa Cole, a motion on the consent agenda.
Move to adopt the consent agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Moved in second to adopt the consent agenda. Alder Verveer?
Thank you again, Mayor. So as it relates to the HR items at the top of the agenda, I just wanted to share a friendly reminder to staff that back in March, the council adopted the ordinance that allows for administratively approved personnel changes in many respects as it relates to reclasses. And that ordinance requires quarterly reports to the Finance Committee and the Personnel Board. The Personnel Board has actually generously been receiving monthly reports, which we're able to see on their agendas, but we haven't yet received report on our agenda. And so I was hoping we could start those quarterly reports. And then if I could further editorialize and ask for perhaps some additional assistance in that legislative file that the Personnel Board sees. When those first started, they actually posted at HR for the Personnel Board's benefit the forms for each of the positions, but then that stopped after the first report, and now it's just a one-page chart that doesn't really share much information. So I was hoping that HR could go back to sharing the actual position personnel changes that are administratively approved as they started doing, and just simply have that legislative file attached to Finance Committee agendas on a quarterly basis moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. I'm not seeing if there's anybody from HR here, but perhaps between finance staff and council office staff who are here, we could convey that request to HR to make those reports.
Thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right, then on the consent agenda, it's been moved and seconded. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor? Seeing no objection, we'll record that vote. And that will take us then to item 19, which is the 2025 budget update, an overview of the executive capital budget and operating budget requests. And I imagine that I'm either turning this over to Christine or Dave or both. Christine?
Yeah, I'm going to get us started. Good afternoon, everyone. So I sent this to alders shortly before this meeting. The presentation today will just provide a brief reminder about how to navigate our budget resources and how to read through each of the sections of the capital budget that agencies will be briefing you on today and tomorrow. We'll go through the agency briefing process as well as timeline for amendments for Finance Committee and the Common Council. We'll share a few highlights from the executive budget summary for the capital budget. Dave will talk about debt service and the relationship between capital and operating budgets. And then I have just a very short update about the operating briefing process or the operating budget development process. So all of our budget materials are on the website. So if you go to cityofmadison.com/budget or go through the finance department, you'll see big buttons for each of the budget years. You click on 2025, go to the capital budget. A few things to highlight. One is we always have an executive summary that I highly recommend as a starting point. It calls out the major items in the budget and things to look out for. We have an intro section. The capital budget summaries has the summary by funding type, by agency, and a few other views that I know alders sometimes find helpful, as well as the horizon list. And then the rest of the budget page is broken out by agency section. And then these are organized by the functional area, so admin, PCED, etc. Within each of the agency budgets, they're organized in the exact same way. The length depends on how many projects an agency has, but the first page is always an overview. That's usually 1, sometimes 2 pages long. The first table is a list of all of the projects and the total funding by year. And then there's a graph that shows the change in budget between the 24 adopted SIP and the 25 executive SIP. And then there's a narrative description of major changes. The next section is a summary of expenditures and revenues. So the total amounts in these tables are the same as the table on the first page, but it breaks it down a few different ways. The first is a table by expenditure type. So this shows if it's a bike path, a road, fiber network, or something else. The next table is a breakdown by funding source. So you have general fund borrowing, non-general fund borrowing, and then all of the other funding types like federal and state sources. And then there's a summary for borrowing that has the total borrowing by general fund and non-general fund, GEO, and then an estimate of annual debt service. And then there's a graph that shows the borrowing versus non-borrowing breakdown of an agency's budget. The next section in every budget is a carry forward table. So this lists all of the projects that were approved in prior years where there's unspent budget authority that's being carried forward or reauthorized in the upcoming year. So this unused appropriation authority is the full budget amount, and then reauthorized GO is how much borrowing is in the budget that's being reauthorized when the budget gets adopted. The snapshot here is for engineering by CPED. A project, for example, that I got a question on today is the Rindle Imagination Center. That's not in the 25 budget, but it was in prior budgets, and that reauthorized amount would show up in the library's table. So this might be a place to look for certain projects that you know are coming, but might not be in the budget. I would check the reauthorization table. And then the main part of each agency budget is the details by project. So here we have some identifying information, the project name, the primary element, and then a narrative description, as well as funding by year by funding type. And then the very last table in the agency section is what's being appropriated in 2025. So this will only list the projects that have a budgeted amount in 2025. It shows what the agency requested and what's included in the executive budget. So if an agency has projects that are in the out years of the SIP, like for example, it starts funding in 2026, then you won't see that project in this table. All right, so then we'll look at the agency briefing and amendment process. Today, after we wrap up this presentation, we'll start with public safety and public health, library, all of the PCED agencies, and then we'll end with administration. And as part of the finance presentation day, we'll also walk through the cash flow statements for impact fees and TIF. Tomorrow, starting at 4:30, we will start with transportation, Monona Terrace, all of the engineering budgets, and then end with the rest of public works. The instructions we gave to agency were to really provide a general high-level overview of their budget, primarily focusing on major changes from the 2024 adopted SIP. So anything that's a new project or projects where funding or timeline have shifted. Instead of doing separate slides, we're just going to share that first page of their budget that has the summary table and a preview of their highlights. If there are other parts of the budget that you want to see or ask questions about, I'm happy to screen share them as needed. But we thought this was a little more efficient than having separate slides that cover the same material. And then after each agency presentation, the committee members will have an opportunity for Q&A. And just as a reminder about the timeline, we are in this finance committee hearing phase. So we have the 2 days of briefings for capital. And then starting on Wednesday, all alders will be able to submit amendment ideas. We ask that you send that to the budget analyst that works with the respective agency. And we ask that we give you a week to submit your idea. So Wednesday, September 18th through the 25th. We ask that you reach out to us no later than noon on Wednesday, the 25th. So we have a few days to finalize the amendment proposals and have everything published by Friday, the 27th, in advance of the meeting on Monday. The meeting on Monday, the 30th, will be hybrid. We're still working out all of the logistics, but have MMB 215 booked for that meeting. And then on the operating side, we'll introduce the budget on October 8th and then follow a similar timeline with 2 days of briefings, a week for amendments, and then a hybrid amendment meeting at the end of October. And then both budgets go back to the Common Council. We'll have about a week and a half amendment period, and then a Wednesday, November 6th deadline for council amendments that are published by Friday before the council meetings. So just a few tips. If you're interested in amending the budget, the first place to start is really understanding what's included in each agency executive budget. So please familiarize yourself with the resources that we have on our website. You're welcome to reach out to myself, any of the budget analysts, as well as agency staff to understand the impacts of your amendment ideas, whether staff have input on the timeline or feasibility with other projects and workload. And again, you don't need, the deadline is to submit your ideas by next Wednesday at 12. You don't need to have your proposal fully fleshed out, but we do need to know something is coming in order to be prepared for the Friday deadline when we actually publish everything. And as a reminder, any alder can submit a finance committee member or finance committee amendment. If you're not on finance committee, you must have a finance committee sponsor, and you can reach out to council leadership to courtesy sponsor your ideas. And also, if you have multiple alders that you're working with on a proposal, please include everyone on email so that we know that folks are verified as co-sponsors so that we can accurately publish the materials when we have them ready. And the amendment form will look very similar to prior years. I still need to update all of the headers, but we try to keep it pretty simple. We're looking for the basic identifying information. So what agency do you want to amend? What's the project? Who are the sponsors? And the budget team will fill out the rest. And then we just need a summary of what you're trying to accomplish with the amendment. So if it's adding a new project, shifting funding, changing the scope of a project, it doesn't need to be perfectly polished, but again, we just need the rough idea of what you want to accomplish, and then we'll put it in the amendment form with the and verify all of the amounts and details before we publish. Right, so with that, I'm going to highlight a few items from the executive budget summary. The 2025 capital budget in total is just over $418 million, with the 6-year capital improvement plan totaling $1.5 billion. This includes all funding sources, so local borrowing, as well as a significant amount of federal grants and other sources. The presentation here shows the total budget by year. So each of these bars represents a year. You can see that the largest amount programmed is in the upcoming year, 2025. And each of the colors represents a different element, which is a category in the Imagine Madison Comprehensive Plan. Probably to no surprise, every year the largest category is land use and transportation, given that the capital budget funds infrastructure, physical, tangible things that mostly fall into this category. It's about 45%, and then the next largest category is green and resilient, followed by neighborhoods and housing. Within the executive summary, we do have these one-pagers that show investments by element. So agencies select an element when they submit a proposal. We know that many projects meet multiple priorities and multiple goals of the city, and we make people select only one. So it's not a perfect representation of everything that the budget is accomplishing, but it is one helpful way to look at the relative spending in different areas. The executive summary has a brief explanation of what's included in the element, the amount by year, the different funding sources, and then a few project highlights. So that was the expenditure side. When we look at the funding sources of the capital budget, a little over half, or 52% of the SIP, is funded through general obligation borrowing. This number includes all sources, so GEO supported by the general fund, as well as other sources such as enterprise funds, utilities, etc. And then the next largest chunk comes from intergovernmental sources, which is primarily federal grants. Some of these grants have been secured. Some of them are speculative, but by including them in the budget, we show a commitment to funding these projects, as well as allow agencies to move more quickly if and when the grant is awarded. And then the other sources include reserves from utilities, special assessments, impact fees, expense depreciation, the water utility, and some other sources. And then just taking a closer look at the GEO borrowing numbers, The executive budget in total reduces GO borrowing compared to the 24 adopted budget and agency request. So this grouped bar chart shows the darkest color is the 24 adopted SIP and what it had projected spending in each of the subsequent years. The lightest blue is what was in the agency request, and the medium color is what's in the executive budget. So you can see what was in the adopted SIP from 24 is higher than what is in the executive budget. Some of this is due to evaluating what funding sources were available, if things could be shifted off of borrowing to federal grants or TIF increment, for example, or moving projects back in the timeline to be more realistic with capacity to complete projects. So you can see in some years, like 2026, the executive budget is higher than the adopted SIP, but overall, when you look at the whole span of the SIP, the executive is less than the 24 adopted SIP and it is a bit less than the request. All right, so then I'm going to turn it to Dave to give his annual reminder about debt service. Dave?
Thanks, Christine. So a little bit of background on the relationship between the general obligation debt, which is what you see in the capital budget, and the repayment of that debt, which is also called debt service, so the repayment of principal and interest, which is shown in the operating budget. So we do issue debt each year to finance the cost of projects that are authorized in the adopted capital budget. As Christine went through, when we look at the total capital budget, a large share of that is financed by general obligation debt. General obligation just means that the city pledges basically through a contract and the adoption of an ordinance to repay that debt from its general taxing authority, in our case, the property tax levy. Other debt that's issued by the city is usually in the form of what's called a revenue obligation, meaning that we pledge revenues such as sewer utility revenues or water user fees to repay that debt. City general obligation debt is usually paid back over 10 years. We're pretty aggressive with repaying our debt. That's one of the fundamental elements of our AAA bond rating. And as I mentioned earlier, that repayment of principal and interest is called debt service, and it's paid for in the operating budget. It's an operating budget cost. And so the final thing is that the budget that you're working on, the 2025 budget, the debt service on that will actually not start until 2026. So what you see in the 2025 operating budget for debt service will be projects that were authorized in the 2024 capital budget. So this just shows where debt service is in the operating budget. You can just see the budget by function. That arrow, that second line there, just shows the amount of, in this case, general fund supported debt service in the general fund budget, and just what that increase from one year to the next. And as you can see, it's the second largest share by function of the general fund operating budget. This is the chart that we show every year. It's that ratio of debt service to the total general fund budget. And this looks at the period from 2015 through the end of the what will be the 2025 capital improvement program, or 2031. And right now we're around 16.6%. Under the 2024 adopted budget, that would have been up close to 20%. Under the executive budget, you can see it's about 1.6% lower than that, and then trends downward. Some of that is due to a smaller capital improvement program. Some of that is due to assuming a higher level of premium based on the amount we received in the August debt issuance. And then some of it is an expectation of some moderation of interest rates compared to where we've been at the last couple of years. So we use that as one lens through which the budget is developed by the mayor. That idea of we need to keep debt service at a prudent level within the overall budget so that it doesn't, at a certain point, crowd out day-to-day operating activities that are funded by the budget. Slide. So we do, though, have the issue of the state law and how the state legislature has constructed limits on property taxes for the city and other cities around the state. First of all, this should be pretty self-evident, but the city cannot cut debt service on already issued debt. As I said earlier, the city has an obligation to repay that debt. It has entered into legal contracts with the entities that have loaned the city that money, that have purchased our debt. If we were to not repay that debt, we would be in default. And local governments in the United States, generally on general obligation debt, do not default on that debt. And that is a part of the rating agency review that we receive each year when we issue debt. They look at our capacity to repay that debt and provide that information to those investors that purchase the city's debt. The levy limit calculation, I think we've talked about that many times, particularly over these last few months as we talk about the city's ongoing structural deficit. But the way it's constructed in state law by the state legislature is that the growth in that allowable property tax levy is focused on operations. It excludes debt service. And it grows by the change in new construction in the city. So what we do is we just add the additional debt service each year based on the amount that we've borrowed in the prior year. So as I mentioned earlier, the 2025 debt service in the levy limit is based on the amount of borrowing that we made back in August. And that's based on the adopted 2024 capital budget. So just to summarize, in terms of the interaction between the levy limit and debt service, the lower debt service does not or does lower the allowable total property tax. So all the things being equal, we'd have less property taxes if we have less debt service. However, under the levy limit, that less debt service cannot be transferred to pay for day-to-day operating costs, our everyday services. Debt service paid by other funds that pays for repaying general obligation debt, for example, stormwater user fees or water user fees, that does help the operating budget because it does kind of create allowable levy that we can use for operations. And the city has employed that approach for many years. Finally, reducing borrowing in the capital budget does not address the structural deficit in the operating budget because of the reasons I just explained. Namely that reducing the capital budget reduces debt service, but that debt service cannot be transferred under the levy limit and used for operating purposes. And this just is an example from a numbers perspective. The top table just shows our actual levy limit calculation that we used in the 2024 budget. It just shows the allowable levy for operations. And basically, because of net new construction, that could go up by that $3,468,000. Debt service is separate. And in debt service, it's looking at all the general obligation debt service, regardless of how it's repaid. That went up by $8.3 million. So you put those two numbers together, our allowable levy could go up by $11.8 million. So if, for example, we were to reduce debt service by $1 million because we reduced borrowing in that 2023 capital budget by $7 million, you'll see in the table at the bottom of this slide that allowable levy for operations doesn't change. It's still $3.5 million. The debt service goes down by $1 million, and the allowable levy goes down by $1 million. But we can't move that $1 million to help pay for operating costs. So just to sort of see what I was talking about in numbers, that's what this slide tries to portray.
Thanks, Dave.
Thanks,
All right.
Christine.
I'm going to end this. We're going to go to the capital briefing soon, but I just wanted to give a quick update on where we are with the operating budget process. I think, as many folks know, the operating requests were published in July. So again, if you go to the finance budget webpage, go to 2025 and click through the operating page, you'll see everything that the agencies submitted. The budget target for general fund agencies was to develop a budget based on a 99% of their cost to continue estimate. If you open up the agency request packets, you'll see the first page is a summary table showing their total budget by fund. There's a memo from the department head outlining their goals, how they plan to meet their budget targets, and then a description of identifying lower priority services. And then there's a 3-part budget service proposal form for each of what we call services in the budget. So finance has 5 services that are accounting, budget, internal audit, treasury, risk management. So each of those services in finance has a section that has a number of questions related to each of those sub-budgets within the finance department. And then the very last pages of the budget packet are what's called the service identification form. And that's where general fund agencies and agencies with a general fund subsidy identified their lower priority activities that and were asked to meet a 5% reduction target. This main 2025 operating webpage also has an update on the budget process document that explains the scenarios with and without the referendum and also summarizes the proposed cuts that are included in each of the agency packets. So this is a useful place to see a summary of all of those pieces. One thing I wanted to note in the 25 operating budget is that we have been working for almost 2 years on updating the services for each of the agencies. So the 25 budget will reflect this new service structure, and currently agencies have one or more services, and these are kind of subunits that have distinct activities and distinct costs that can be budgeted to those activities. All of these services were designed about 10 years ago when we implemented Munis, and they may not perfectly reflect an agency's actual work today. So we've been working with them, with all of the agencies, to take a look at what they currently have in the budget and how the structure could be refined to better reflect their work. And this has been all a part of the umbrella of Results Madison, which is a strategic framework to align services with outcomes that matter to residents. So through this process, we asked agencies to review their services and activities, provide updates to the structure to better reflect what they do, with the goal of ultimately improving internal and external reporting and facilitate the strategic allocation of resources. What all of this actually looks like is, for some agencies, this means no change. For example, many of our very small agencies only have one service and they stay at one service. For other agencies, they'll add services to create more granularity in the budget. Very few agencies consolidated services, like streets had several services that all did similar things, so they consolidated it into one activity. And then there are some technical shifts where people are moving where they account for certain items across services. So for example, I would say about half of the agencies have some change to their service structure. Most of the changes involved creating new services or additional granularity. An example of this is in the police department. Currently, if you look at their budget, they have 2 services, police field and support The 25 budget is going to have 5 services. So for administration, community support, criminal investigation, patrol operations and traffic, and training. And the goal of this is to really provide more transparency in how the department spends budgets and spends their money. However, I wanted to point out that we won't be able to show the budget history at the service level because we can't backwards map the new structure onto past actuals. So the budget will look different, and we're not trying to hide anything or be less transparent. It's just we can't go backwards with all of these changes. So for everyone, you will see the budget history at the total agency level. So you'll see the general fund budget and whatever other funds are in the agency, but you just won't see that at the services. So I just wanted to make sure that folks were aware of the change. And I mentioned in the timeline slide that the budget's going to be introduced October 8th with finance committee hearings the following Monday and Tuesday, the 14th and 15th. So that's all of our updates. We'll pause for questions and then get started with a capital briefing, starting with public safety and public health.
Thank you, Christine. Are there questions on the overview? Going once, going twice. Christine, you did an excellent job. No questions. So then we will move on to the agency briefings. And our first area is public safety and health, and we'll start with the fire department. Chief?
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Here this afternoon with myself and also Brent Sloat for any questions. To kick things off, I guess with a summary here, we are a pretty straightforward group. We really do not have any major changes in comparison to the adopted 2024 SIP. We have 2 larger areas, both our communications equipment and our fire and EMS equipment. Those are fairly self-explanatory, but of course, I'll take any questions when the time's appropriate. We also have the Fire Station 6 rebuild that is part of the larger South Madison redevelopment project. And then we also have the training capability development going on at Station 14, although there is nothing in the 2025 budget for that one. With that, I will just prepare for any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chief. Any questions for fire? Going once, going twice. No questions for fire. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
We'll move on to the police department. Chief?
Good afternoon, everyone. Chief Barnes here with Assistant Chief John Patterson, as well as Teague Maurer. We have 2 projects for our capital budget. Project 1, of course, is the technology and equipment, as well as the new property and evidence South Police Station, which were already approved in the SIP, plus 1 new project, which is the radios, which is an emergency critical need. We discovered earlier this year that the company Motorola was going to sunset those radios, which means that we would not be able to repair those if they were broken. So we have submitted for and approved to get monies to replace those radios, but that will be done over a 4-year period, I believe. If there's any questions, we can certainly answer those.
Thank you, Chief. Questions for MPD? Alder Rummel?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. Can you talk a little bit about the relocating of the property facilities to the new station and how you see that, where they all are and how they'll be incorporated into the, not how, I mean, I know they'll be incorporated in a new building, but just the timeline of getting everything else moved over there?
Yep, I'll start and then I'll switch it over to JP. We did have to back that up a little bit with one of the fire stations needing additional space. But as we see it, we currently have several facilities that are servicing people who need to get property that has either been recovered or is in evidence. And so certainly having everything in one building makes it easier for our community members, some of which do not have vehicles to come and get those. And so we just believe that it's a better system, as well as we will not be able to, well, once we do that, we won't have to pay for some of the other buildings that we're currently leasing in order to have that property. One of those includes First Street, where obviously we're having our public market. So we'll be able to remove those pieces of evidence from there eventually to make way and more space for that very important project that I think a lot of people support, including myself. And so, JP, do you have any additional?
Well, thank you, Chief. Just one change this year, Alder. The project timeline was just pushed back slightly, to the Chief's point, to allow the fire department to occupy the current space that will eventually become the new property and evidence and South District facility. So just to accommodate that move, we won't be able to occupy until around 2027. Probably later, because I think fire is expected to be at that location through 26. So more than likely late 27, early 28. I would suspect we'd be able to start that move and consolidating all our facilities.
Thank you, Mayor. I see that Matt Wachter turned his camera on because maybe he knew I was thinking about First Street. And maybe, Matt, you can help me understand. So this would come, these relocating would be in 27-ish. And what happens to properties like First Street? You know, can we use those? Do we own that property? And then can we incorporate it in some part of the public market plans?
We do own, so the First Street site, yes, we do own. Some of the other properties are leased spaces, so those leases would just end. So if we're vehicle storage is happening, we would just end the lease. But yeah, yes, for First Street, I think once we get a little farther and these timelines get firmed up a bit, we would work with engineering to make a plan for what happens to that facility at First Street, and whether it would be, you know, parking lot expansion or something else. I don't know the answer to that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa-Cole.
So I heard thank you, Mayor. I heard the comment about the cars facility. So the new facility will contain all the evidence locations into one, including the vehicle place. I see.
That's correct, Alder.
Oh, good. Think that is great. I didn't realize that will be that big of a space. And also, for the money that we're using next year for the planning, does the planning include any changes to processes and standard operating procedures on how to manage evidence? Like, you know, on the, for example, on the county building location, there's all those CDs and all that data that is very old and archaic. I mean, is that going to be transferred into digital, or what's the process on that?
The answer is yes. We've already began the process of determining what pieces of evidence we can transfer to the cloud if the law allows it. There's also a plan. Obviously, we have a new evidence manager and supervisor, and she's been working on a plan to systematically go through our evidence, and anything that we can discard, we will certainly do that. However, it's important to note that for some of the retention schedules in Wisconsin, it could be up to 99 years for certain things. So we are certainly hoping to only move those things over into the new facility that we absolutely need. And as regards to cars and vehicles, especially those that were involved in crimes, we're at the will, if you will, of the district attorney's office and the manner in which they process those cases, and whether or not they feel that there's some evidentiary value. So we have to keep those.
Thank you. I lost the connection, but I thank you for answering the questions. I appreciate that. That's part of the process.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Harrington McKinney.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Chief, you said that you talked about the replacement over a 4-year period of your radios. Is there estimate of how many radios will be needed to be repurchased over that sunset period?
Yes, they will all have to be replaced, and we're suggesting that they be replaced over a 4-year period. We'll obviously try to keep a few just in case we can make some repairs for those. But we currently have 492 officers, and everyone is assigned a radio. With the addition of actually, there are some that are assigned to some of our professional staff, if you will, but they will all have to be replaced. Again, earlier this year, we learned that the company has stated that they would not be providing any replacements or parts for those particular radios. And I did check with staff today, and they're 10 years old.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions? Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief. New topic, but a topic you might recall that I raised in the past, and that is the issue of city security cameras. And in preparation for my questioning later this evening and tomorrow of IT and TE, respectively, I was hoping you could just explain to the committee the importance of city security cameras to your investigative work. I recently received a copy of the Excel spreadsheet that Director Lee Hunt, as you know, has coordinated amongst your district captains and others to compile the list of the current status of city cameras. And I was really disappointed to see that the current list that I received the other day is 75 cameras currently listed as inoperable. And as you know, Director Hunt's work includes prioritizing those cameras at the district level to help prioritize then IT and TE's work. So could you just generally speak to that issue that I know has been an important one for your management team? I'll also add and further editorialize that some detectives have now begun to share with victims apparently that cameras are down and that has hurt the detective work, because I know I've heard from some victims that have expressed that concern then directly to me that their crimes might be solved quicker or at all if the cameras were up and running near the scene of where they were victimized.
No, I appreciate that question. There's like 2 or 3 parts in there, so yes. Forgive me if I don't go in the correct order. But first of all, let me say that certainly public space cameras aid in the investigative process, but they are not the only source of information. And any detective who tells someone that cameras are the only vehicle that we use to solve crimes is probably misquoting the investigative process. We work extremely hard in a variety of ways to discover those who may have committed crimes or victimized people here in the city of Madison. So I want to be very clear on that. As a detective, the number one rule is never solve a crime by one method and one method only. That's the quickest way to get your case overturned or to perhaps put the wrong person behind bars, 2 things that we never really want, or I want as a leader. So I want to be clear on that. The second thing that I will say is that, these cameras appeared through multiple stages. There were some cameras that we believe the police department were responsible for them, some that we believe traffic engineering, some the state, some IT. And so we're working through all of that. What we asked Dr. Hunt to do was to kind of give us an idea of where those cameras were and what was operable and inoperable. I'll ask JP in a minute to talk about how we transferred some grant money over to IT to get those cameras fixed, but they are indeed equipment that are subject to the elements and spider webs and everything else that may happen out in the city. I think IT is doing an an excellent job, if you will, of trying to keep up with that. It was a conversation of a meeting that I had not too long ago with my command staff about making sure that those cameras are working. For example, the statute that was put up recently at the Capitol, I wanted to make sure that we had a public space camera that would be on that Val Phillips statute, that it would be on that if we needed it. And so we do this periodically. I think, this is something that's been a long time coming. I think we probably should have had this conversation 5 or 6 years ago to make sure that these cameras are working. But I have full faith and confidence that we can put our heads together between IT, my group, and even traffic engineering, and we can figure this out. Certainly, I am sorry if anyone is victimized in this city, but again, cameras help us out tremendously. I can think of many cases, especially in the downtown area, where cameras were increasingly helpful. But when they don't work, it's not always an idea of who didn't do what. Sometimes we're just subject to the mechanics of it. I think if we were to look at, different systems or replacing them all, it would be an extremely high cost to the city. And so right now, I think we're doing it in the way that's most equitable and feasible for the taxpayers of Madison. And that's we're working to identify those cameras, and we're trying to get them done as soon as we can. JP, can you speak a little bit, if you don't mind, about the money that was transferred and those cameras that were fixed through IT?
You bet, Chief. So last year, Alder, if you remember, the state of Wisconsin funneled some one-time funds to law enforcement agencies, and a portion of the MPD funds that were awarded, we did route towards camera repair, and so that was obviously in collaboration with city IT staff. We identified the cameras that were MPD owned or that had been acquired through past projects, and were at the time assigned to police, and was try to increase the capacity of their program to hopefully get them ahead for this year. So that, a lot of the cameras have been purchased on an ad hoc basis, and so it's a pretty big task for our IT staff to keep a lid on. So, but they've been real good to collaborate with, and we work with them regularly on that list that you're referring to.
Thank you both, chiefs. I just want to at the top clarify that the detective that had been mentioning the camera issue to victims that they're working with in no way, shape, or form said, "Oh, kind of woe is me. If only this camera was operating on State and Gorham, for example, we'd have this solved." So I didn't want to give that false impression. So thank you at the top, Chief Barnes, for clarifying that. What I've learned more recently is that, unfortunately, at least Central District detectives are having to really rely more on privately owned cameras to solve crimes, because so many Central District city-owned cameras are inoperable as we speak, and that bears out when you look at the, again, 75 camera locations on Dr. Hunt's Excel spreadsheet, which, by the way, again, are citywide and prioritized, as you know, by each of your district captains in that document. The cameras are just so critical, and obviously, as you know, played a huge role in quickly apprehending the downtown arson suspect just last week.
Alder, is there another question coming?
Yes. So I just wanted to clarify at the top. Thank you, Mayor, for your allowance. I just wanted to clarify again. I didn't want anyone to have the false impression that any MPD detectives are saying that they can't do their work because there's no city cameras. My one follow-up question, and then I will certainly yield and have much longer colloquy with Director Edgerton and Traffic Engineer Tao tomorrow. Director Edgerton later today and Director Tao tomorrow, is JP or Teague, could you just confirm the way that the grant funding was utilized for cameras, is that was this calendar year or was that last calendar year? because I do recall that when Ed Marshall was still at the Central District, that he worked directly with private third-party contractors and used MPD funding to get some cameras repaired. I know, and that was in 2022, as I recall.
That was one-time funding for last year. We weren't not able to carry anything forward, so all funds had to be expended by the end of last year. And so T would know the exact amount, but it was close to 100,000 that was initially dedicated towards the cameras. I don't know if we expended that full amount, but we tried to take as many of the down cameras and get those repaired as possible before the end of the year.
Did you wish to add anything, Teague? I see you turned your camera on for us. No, but to clarify, MPD is not currently utilizing any of your funds, be it grant funds or levy, city levy funds for cameras at this time, correct, this year?
No, right? We're relying on the program that IT has at this point.
I understand. Thank you all very much. Thank you again, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Mayor. Another quick question. So, with regards to the academy, are there any academy capital costs in this budget?
I can jump in, Chief. So in the technology and equipment program, Alder, for 2025, there are some AV upgrades scheduled for the training center. So not dedicated solely to the academy, because obviously there's other users of that space, but there are AV upgrades scheduled for next year.
And maybe for future question, we'll see on the upcoming budget any separation for the academy, or is that still in the works?
For next year, training is one of those new service categories that will be separated out.
For 2025?
That's right. In operating, yes. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any further questions for the police department? If not, thank you all. And we'll move on to public health. Director Heinrich?
Good evening, everyone. I'll be brief. You will see no changes to 2025 compared to our 2024 adopted SIP. What you will see is the support for the redevelopment of our South Madison clinic in the Badger Park redevelopment space. We're really excited about that and are happy to be engaged in that planning process. Otherwise, we don't have much as usual in our SIP. So happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for public health? Going once, going twice. If not, thank you very much, Janelle. Our next category is public spaces, and we'll hear from the library. Director Elias.
Good evening. We also don't have anything new. We have over the 6-year SIP, we have just 5 projects and 2 programs. In 2025, we have central library improvements at $250,000. We have the major repair and replacement at $166,000. Library collection is an ongoing project or program that we work on. That's $860,000. And the technology upgrades. We actually had a decrease in what we were projecting to spend this year. We were able to fund about $152,000 with other funds, including ARPA funds and foundation funds. And so this has reduced to $135,000.
Thank you, Tana. Questions for library? Going once, going twice. No questions for library. We'll move on then to PCED and start with planning. Director Tuttle.
Good evening. Thank you, Mayor. The planning division capital budget for 2025 is the same as previous years. It includes just one program, which is the Municipal Art Fund, which includes the maintenance and expansion of the city's public art collection, and programs like the Artists in Residence and some of our staff that support the continuation of the municipal art program. So we are seeking the similar amount, $160,000, as we have in previous years, and there are no major changes. I also have Principal Planner Bill Fruling and Art Program Administrator Karen Wolf here if there are any questions.
Thank you. Any questions for planning? Going once, going twice. Seeing no questions, thank you very much. Megan, you survived your first budget briefing.
Thank
More
you.
to come. All right, CDA redevelopment is next.
Thank you. Unlike the other presentations, we do have a very significant change in CDA redevelopment, and that's really moving the phases 2 and 3 of the triangle from the horizon list into the budget. And that's because phase 1 was successful in receiving tax credits. So because phase 1 is moving forward in March of 2025, we plan to quickly move into phases 2 and 3 after phase 1 is completed. The one thing that has definitely changed since putting this forward is that it looks like we did not receive the grant that is in this budget. So we will be actively working to retool budgets as well as just continuing to refine these as we move through design. And then you've heard a lot about the South Madison redevelopment in some of the other presentations. So this is really the housing components that sit in the CDA redevelopments budget. And just for a timeline update, we are planning to go back to the neighborhood and a number of city committees the next month with the site plan, with the goal of bringing the master plan to the council by the end of the year. That'll lay out really in more detail where the buildings will be, how big they'll be, number of units, levels of affordability, and a more detailed timeline, with the idea that then we would move into more complete design in 2025. So that is all that I have.
Thank you, Matt. Questions for CDA redevelopment? Going once, going twice, seeing no questions. Then we'll go on to the Community Development Division. Director O'Keefe.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. There's little or nothing new in the 2025 executive budget for CDD either. The executive budget continues and sustains authorization for capital projects pretty much as they were established in the 2024 SIP. Chief among them, as you can see, is our work around affordable housing. The process through which we will allocate much of the funding that you will authorize for affordable housing in 2025 is currently underway in the form of 2 separate RFP processes, one focused on development proposals that will seek tax credit financing, and the other on proposals that will not pursue tax credits. I just want to tell you that the response to this summer's tax credit application cycle is the strongest since the Affordable Housing Fund was established some 10 years ago. 9 proposals have been submitted. 1 has been subsequently withdrawn. But collectively, the remaining proposals represent nearly 600 units of new affordable housing. So a multi-agency staff team is currently evaluating those requests. Presentations were made to the city's CDBG committee just last week. The proposals, as you might imagine, have asked for much more assistance than we have the funds to provide. And as the review process proceeds, this sometimes works itself out. But there is a distinct possibility this year that we will not be able to support all of the proposals. That would be a pretty rare occurrence. So stay tuned on that. In coming months, we will be preparing staff recommendations for both the tax credit and non-tax credit proposals. Those recommendations will be presented to and reviewed and finalized by the CDBG committee and then forwarded to the full council for final decisions in November or December. Want to note that likely to be included among the recommendations for non-tax credit developments could be the first offer of tax increment financing funding that was donated to TIF District 51 for use in South Madison. Just want to mention that one item that does not appear in the summary, but which is carried over from 2024 is funding for the construction of the new men's shelter. I mentioned that as by way of informing you that that project got underway last week. So that's really all I've got, but happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Jim. Questions for community development? Going once, going twice. Not seeing any questions, so we'll move on to Economic Development Division.
Good evening, everyone. The Economic Development Division executive capital budget for next year really does not have significant changes from the SIP. We continue to maintain all of our small business development programs, such as the facade grant, commercial ownership assistance, the building improvement grant program, and the small cap TIF program. Most of those programs are funded out of 5 TID districts, including State Street, South Madison, East Wash, Wilson, and Pennsylvania. We also continue the Small Business Equity and Recovery Program that funds these small business programs for businesses located outside of those TID districts. This is one change within our budget. You'll see no new funding in 2025. And the reason for that is we're still carrying forward a significant balance from 2023 and 2024 dollars. So we don't anticipate that we will need any new funding for 2025. So even though you don't see any dollars allocated in 2025, we still will have funding to fund those projects that are outside of TIDs. We also continue the Healthy Retail Access Program, which provides both grants and technical assistance to food-based businesses. Other non-small business related funding in our budget is funding for some implementation planning in TID 36, some furniture and fixture upgrades in TID 50, State Street, and also continued work on our land banking program in TID 51, which is South Madison. We've also included some funds for some pre-development costs associated with the upcoming Brayton Lot RFP, which is funded out at TID 53. Finally, some non-TID projects. We continue funding for our land banking program, including holding costs. We also continue funding for our general land acquisition program, as well as holding costs. And that program, by way of reminder, is for purchasing property for city purposes. And then we also maintain our business park holding costs. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Matt. Questions on economic development? Going once, Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Matt. Just a request, and that is, I really appreciate on your EDC agendas having the regular financial assistance dashboard. And I'm not sure if most of my council colleagues are aware that that is a regular feature of your EDC agendas. Is that something that your staff could possibly email on a monthly basis to all alders? Because I think it's very helpful information, at least for those of us that do have active TIDs that finance those important programs.
Sure, we'd be happy to do that.
That would be great. Thank you. One other question that came up at the Business Improvement District Board meeting the other day, and that is, could you estimate what the usual time is to process a big grant? And I realize I'm asking you to generalize very much, but assuming that the required information gets into your office and so forth, could you generalize again what the average time is to process a big grant?
Sure. A lot really depends on the readiness of the business with the information in hand. But once we have all of the information, we can process it in a matter of a couple of weeks. We have a standing internal staff meeting that is on the calendar, I think every other week, for the staff review team that reviews the applications. So once we receive that application, we can get approval by that staff team, usually within a couple weeks, and then move right into contracting. What is often the holdup is if a business isn't quite sure what they want to do, or they're still getting quotes, that might delay things. But once the information is there, we can move pretty quickly.
Sounds good. Thanks very much.
Yep.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions for economic development? If not, thank you, Matt.
Thank you, everyone.
And we'll move into the administration category and start with IT. Director Edgerton.
Hi, Mayor. Good evening, Common Council. My name is Sarah Edgerton. My pronouns are she, her, and with me is Amanda Lift-Johan, who is our Finance and Budget Manager. And I believe we'll be answering some questions tonight that we will be getting. So we are ready to go. For 2025, it looks as though we have major changes, but we don't actually. There was just quite a few name changes as we are aligning our programs to our Results Madison programs. And so we combined several programs so that we didn't have as many. We also have a few increases in our 2026 with our Enterprise Business Solutions. One of them is for the Tyler Finance migration to the cloud. And then another one is for our Kronos software, which is for public safety, and Public Works for timekeeping and scheduling. And there has been some inflation increases with that we are seeing with those projects. And then in 2029, we have one other project that's in our network operations and infrastructure project. And this is a project that we're going to need to address increasing the city's bandwidth. So, having bigger networks so that we can handle all of the data that is crossing over, all of the cloud projects that we have, all the cameras on our infrastructure, everything that is there, we need to have a bigger bandwidth infrastructure, and we think 2029 is when we will be able to do that. So those are the big things that we have for our 2025 SIP plan.
Thank you, Sarah. Questions for IT? Alder Figueroa Cole. We can't hear you if you are.
I'm
Oh, there you go.
on, so I am logging with two items here. So yes. Hey Sarah, so I understand the maintenance line where you have all those projections for the SIP all the way to the end, but the other items, are there like projects that have an ending, or are they just a project that cost that much over the years to complete? Can you explain that part to me, please?
Sure, I'm going to ask Amanda to answer that.
If you can share the screen again, I would really appreciate it.
I apologize. Somebody had pinged me about requesting something else right in the middle of your question. So I missed your question. I'm sorry.
Right. So the lines, okay, there we go. So when we're talking about here, like network operations and infrastructure lifecycle management, so I understand that would be like like maintenance or preventive maintenance all the way every year. But are the other things also maintenance, or are those projects that you're dividing the cost across the years with a deadlines or an end date?
So I would say pretty much all of our programs that we have listed here all have some type of lifecycle management component to them. It's a different type of lifecycle management component for each of the different programs listed, but we do have ones that do have different projects within those programs as well. So they do lifecycle management, but that we do have other projects. So security, risk, and compliance does have some projects related to the PCI compliance for network segmentation for 25 and for 2025. Some of the other projects that we have within these are ones that involve a security addition for our new website that we stood up. Otherwise, for 2025, I would say the majority of the programs or the projects that we have within these programs and some cleanup.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions? Alder Verveer.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Sarah. I know you've been eagerly anticipating my questions about your cameras that IT is responsible for. So perhaps to start, I know that you and your staff have been working diligently on this. Please don't take any of this as criticism by any means. And the chief, made that clear in his response to my earlier question. So why don't I begin with something that you've already referenced, and that is the project name changes and combinations, and say that I was optimistic that when the new project was introduced in during last year's capital budget deliberations, Mary Batari, who had been working on this issue, and I were really optimistic that having a separate project would make a meaningful difference in a separate pot of money and not compete with all the other desperately needed projects, critical projects that you and your staff work on day in and day out. So could you help alleviate my concerns that by combining this function as it relates to the cameras will not mean that it's competing for all of the other work that's under this newly proposed project?
Well, to be very frank, it is competing. So, there is only so much staff in IT. And so when we work on these projects, it's the same staff that are working on camera management and then also the audiovisual. The priority is always the camera management, but there is other work that they have to do with the audiovisual, because when those go down, they have to deal with that as well. And since it is the same person and the same team that works on it, by putting this together, it's saying that this is of importance to them, and that this is one of their core services that they support. So the camera management program is very important to us, and we do have some increases in cost as we're trying to support this and as we're trying to figure out how to better manage this. Unfortunately, we sort of inherited chaos, and we're trying to create something out of that is going to make sure that we are serving residents and supporting our peers and making sure that they're able to get their work done. And we are also dealing with, as the chief said, cameras are finicky and just about anything will turn them off. And we've also had quite a bit of construction that's been going on, and that's been impacting them as well. So there's been a lot of different things that we're trying to deal with. And one of the things that I would like to note is that as part of the network infrastructure and operations project, they're working on taking, trying to figure out how I can say this. So a lot of our cameras are connected like as a daisy chain. So if one camera goes down, many cameras go down. So as part of the network operations and infrastructure project that they're working on in 24 and then in 25 and 26, they're getting it so that it separates those out so that the cameras are not impacted as if when one goes down. So sort of like Christmas lights. When one light goes out, then all the lights go out. It's that same idea. And so we're trying to separate those out and have a better infrastructure and a better architecture for the cameras so that the cameras are not impacted by what is happening with another camera. So that's part of that infrastructure piece. All of our teams basically work together to support each other. And these projects, oftentimes you will see, like in camera management, that there's the maintenance, and then there's another project in network and operations to support that infrastructure and the architecture to make sure that those cameras can stand up and get moving. And then there's the fiber program, which makes sure that we have the fiber there so that we can continue to add cameras as we need to. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you for trying to reassure me that and being very honest, Sarah, obviously that yes, indeed, we are competing for different projects, different needs within your agency, within your capital budget. Do you have any concerns that the proposed traffic engineering executive capital budget for next year still uses the current project name, camera lifecycle management, and so we won't have the camera lifecycle management if the council approves the executive capital budget as is? TE will have a camera lifecycle management standalone project, but IT would not.
No, we don't think so. Finance did ask about this, and I don't think so. We can certainly pull out for 2026 and highlight the camera management part of that program. I'm hearing you, and I think that that's very important that we make sure to highlight underneath what the projects are for 2026, 2027, and moving forward. So we can make sure that we do that for next year.
So we can talk further about that offline. Perhaps.
Yes, I would love to.
Yeah. Capital budget amendment. Thank you. I appreciate that very much, Sarah. I read your agency request, and particularly as it relates to camera lifecycle management, and in your narrative, and you've obviously been articulating this as well in your initial response to my first question. But anyway, you write that, quote, we experienced delays in materials and resources and are still working through the 2024 funding of AV lifecycle management program. Therefore, we've reduced funding for 25 and 26 since you're not able to support new project work. Could you elaborate further on that? Is most of it just because you don't have the staff resources? Is much of it indeed like supply chain materiality issues? And I'll just throw another topic in for your response. As you know, the police department in the past went out on their own using their funds and used third-party private electrical contractor to repair the most critical cameras, in their estimation, at least some of the most critical cameras in the past. Is that something that we are continuing to do, or are these repairs only solely being done and both currently and in the future by city forces? Sorry to, again, multi-part question there.
I'm going to ask Amanda, who is actually overseeing this program as we're moving through these things, and she can speak to this.
Great. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Amanda.
Yep. So the reading that you just had from our letter was as it relates to the AV side of things and not the camera side of things. So just want to make sure that there's a separation between the two. So the AV side of the world is equipment that is installed to support certain spaces to have hybrid type meetings and or spaces that allow for staff to have virtual meetings. There were a lot of delays in getting equipment and professional services in to be able to install in those spaces. So we did reduce funding and the request for that in 25 due to that. We are seeing a project that started in 22, almost 23, come to fruition here in 2024. And so there was a lot of delays there. And so that put back some other projects because of that. So I just want to make sure that there's a separation between those two. But the camera project itself, we are still working through getting cameras replaced. I do believe we did reduce a little bit, and that is because we have found that there is a lot more time and energy that goes into the first steps of the camera lifecycle management, and that truly is the triage portion. And the triage portion requires up to 3-4 people from IT to do some troubleshooting on their end first from various teams to ensure that it's not something that their connection point is with that camera and or system. And then from there, working with a third-party vendor to go out and install and or triage at the physical camera. So, so there is a little bit of reduction because we do have funding still available from 24 yet to be able to support that that program. Now, the other delay is the camera management system is coming online. So we've had a soft moratorium on install of cameras. And so we had to slow down a little bit. But we are working through certain camera replacements, like some of the PD list that was mentioned earlier. Some of those are actually being replaced this week. So I hope that.
Thank you very much. And those are those done by traffic engineering electricians or by
Not necessarily.
electricians?
Not necessarily. It all depends. So it depends on how that camera is connected. If that camera is connected in traffic engineering facilities, then we do have to have traffic engineering come out to help support. And they have limited staffing to help with that too. So it's really a joint effort between IT and TE on certain cameras that are not TE owned, that are most likely PD owned, that are in the traffic right away and connected to TE facilities. Otherwise, if they are connected to facilities that are not through TE connection points, then we can work directly with the third-party vendor who can just go out and do the replacement, and we can ensure on our end that things are connected and working as they should be. And we don't have, like Sarah said, we picked up a lot of chaos, I think, with this program. And so we don't have a full listing of how some of these are connected. So some of it is by going out and seeing how it's connected.
And then, by the way, just to go back to understanding your agency request, because of the merger of the different projects proposed, what I was reading earlier, I assumed did include camera management lifecycle, because what I read was under the new digital media program. But you're saying that AV, what the narrative I read a few minutes ago, Amanda, relates more to the currently named audiovisual program and not the camera management lifecycle program?
Correct. It's more on the AV side of that account than it is on the camera side of the account.
But in the executive capital budget for next year, you are proposing to merge both of those into one.
Yep. As a part of looking at our results, Madison, and trying to ensure that our capital budget aligns with our operating budget, which aligns with results, Madison.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And then just referencing again, the MPP.
I'm sorry, can I just get a small clarification there? Amanda, what I heard you say is that the problems around supply chain were related to the not to the camera management system.
Correct.
Right.
The AV.
Yes, thank you, Mayor, for the clarification. That's what I heard as well. And that's why I was seeking the further clarification and explaining that I read what I thought was related to cameras, because again, it's this merge project in the agency request. But anyway, then just referring back to that Excel spreadsheet that Director Hunt is responsible, I guess, for coordinating amongst the district captains in the police department. You obviously have access to that Excel spreadsheet, I'm sure, real time. And to Sarah's earlier point, yes, I absolutely should have conceded or represented it initially when I referenced that some of those are down due to construction, and that spreadsheet makes that clear that some are down to construction. For example, the Lake Street parking ramp is one example of that. But anyway, Amanda, as part of those 70, could you just generally speak to that 75 list of 75 when you say that, literally this week, some of those are being repaired or replaced? Could you give us more of a guide as to, of the 75 listed there, taking out those that are related to construction only? Do you think that you'll be, by the end of this year, won't be making really good progress? Or again, given all the reasons you earlier articulated, we might not be as optimistic to get through a lot of that prioritized list from the police?
Yeah, so there's a couple of impacts when it comes to that list from police, and I'll be very transparent. I personally have not seen that list.
I'll email it to you tonight. I'm sorry.
No, that's totally fine. Our staff, I confirmed with Zach Commons, he's seen it. And working with PD, they prioritized a list of 10 cameras that we were able to work with IBS to get out there and look at them and make sure that they can replace them. We do have to figure out if TE has to be involved in those replacements yet. So TE was really gracious in being able to send a guy that could come and help us with that effort if needed. So there are 10 this week that will be looked at to be replaced. I believe at least 6 of them are for sure that have to be replaced. The motor has died. We've learned that a lot of the cameras that were installed, it was just get a camera installed, and it wasn't, let's take into account that they're outdoor cameras. Let's take into account that these are going to be on what they call a tour. So it changes from this view to this view to this view, and it just, pan, tilt, zoom cameras can change the views depending on the tour. And so the motor burns out very quickly on some of those. And so 4 of the cameras that are on that list actually have that as a specific problem. And they're out of warranty. So at this point, we just have to replace them. But going back to what I said earlier of when we look at this entire list, there are at least 3 or 4 people from IT alone that have to look and check into these cameras. Then it's also working in tandem with TE to understand if any of these cameras actually touch their facilities and see if they can go out and try and troubleshoot the cameras themselves. And so there's a lot of coordination work between the both of our agencies who do have a lot of work on our plates at this point. So along with that coordination, then it's coordinating with a third-party vendor to say, okay, we've whittled down the list. We know that these are the ones that do need to be replaced. These are the ones that you can go out and replace, and getting them to go out there and do it. They're also the vendor that's working on our camera management system, which we hope to have online end of this year, beginning of next year, depending on a few things that are going on there. And with that, we can't be replacing cameras as we are doing specific parts to migrating and working on that new system. So we're kind of in this catch-22 of what work we can get done. I would say that I would not be very hopeful to get the entire list completed this year, especially because I have a feeling that probably at least a third of that list are down due to reasons due to construction and or some of the daisy chaining issues that Sarah was explaining before. And it could be very well more than a third of those. Unfortunately, there's a lot of digging that we have to do to figure out what's going on with them.
Can I add one thing to that, though? Because I'd like to put some hope into this conversation here, because I think that's important. With our new system, with the new camera management system that we're going to have, it is going to provide us with a much better view and much better reports that we can get daily to let us know what cameras are down, and so that we can respond in a much more agile reaction rather than our sort of reactive response. We can be far more proactive about it. And then we'll also be able to see what cameras, as we're moving through this, what cameras are having issues. And, even before they're down, if there are connection issues, we'll be able to troubleshoot that through the software as well. So we're working with legacy software that doesn't give us any insight. And so that goes back to Amanda's, point of we have to have so many staff looking at this because we don't have that view that we need to do a lot of the problem solving. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel for this.
Well, I really appreciate that. And again, as I said at the outset, please don't take this as criticism. It's just obviously been a topic of great interest to me. As you know, we've asked about this in prior years at this session, and it's just frustrating that it's taking so long. But we understand the reasons why. Let me just close on this topic by asking a real basic question, and that is, and I mentioned to you, Sarah, that I'll happy to work with you offline on a capital budget amendment for further clarifying camera management. But if we provided additional GO borrowing authorization for this project next year, would that make a big difference or not, would you two say?
No, I don't think so. I think at this point, we have a good understanding of what needs to be done. It's the staffing of being able to project manage this and to move things through.
Thank you. And again, I'll continue the conversation offline.
Yep.
Mayor, I do have a question about a different topic, but I see Alder Rummels had her hand raised. If So I'll yield to Alder Rummel if she has follow-ups on the topic of cameras.
Alder Rummel?
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Director Edgerton. I have a question about the Horizon list, and it's a topic that I'm interested in, which is the 311 CRM proposal, which has also been many years in the making. I'm just wondering if you can give us an update. I know it's a big project and a big lift, but just sort of, is there any hope in that project eventually getting off the Horizon list and moving forward?
I would love to see that project move forward and to get it off the project list. I think one of the big things that came out of this last study is that there really needs to be a partnership with the county. We need to be thinking about how can we work with the county, because there are things like public health that is both city and county, and it's hard to for residents to understand where they live, and when they're calling, are they calling the city or are they calling the county? So we need to be working with them to look at how do we do this at more of a county level with a city component to it. I think that once we have Acela move to the cloud, that there's also going to be some opportunities there for looking at implementing the CRM and looking at that. So hopefully at some point we can bring that forward, but that's also resources for staffing. So that's the other consideration that we would have to think about with this. So it's a greater conversation, and that's why I feel very strongly that having the county as a partner in this is really how we're going to need to move forward to make this work.
Have you made any outreach to the county to get their thinking?
So I've spoken to the mayor about it, and I'm going to let the mayor answer at that point.
Thanks.
Thanks, Alder. I think we are in a holding pattern until we have a new county executive. I just don't think there's, I could have a conversation with the current county executive, but she will be gone soon. And this is something that we would have to work on with the new administration. So it's on the list for whoever the next county executive is. And that's something that, we'll work through that whole list of things that we have to talk about between city and county at that point.
Thank you.
Alder Revere, you had additional questions?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. And I know that Sarah and Amanda and Director Schmidtke are all anticipating this line of questioning, and that is the annual update on our Munis ERP system implementation. Sarah, I know you mentioned in your presentation initially the migration to the cloud for Tyler, and I was just wondering if you and Dave can give your usual very interesting update on implementation of modules and phases and so forth.
Dave, do you want to go? I've spoken about our big one, which is the Tyler migration, which is going to be a huge project for 2026 for IT.
Thanks, Alder Revere, for your perennial question. It's going well. We've moved through the general billing module. We implemented the tax module. We are now moving to the special assessment module, which I think Sarah will confirm is perhaps the last system that's on a very old database called Progress. And we're looking at outside software options for that. Of course, we've got to run that through Munis. I think once we get through that, we're pretty close to, being done with all of the implementation. And then we're in, more of the update phases, which is kind of what the migration to the cloud is all about, because that's how the system will operate moving forward. So, happy to answer any other questions, Alder Revere. So,
yeah, no, thank you both very much. Could you remind me, please, was the implementation by Tyler Technologies to include eventually licenses and permits like the residential parking permit and so forth, and because it seems to me that ELAM is still what the city website uses for those functions, or Acela, perhaps, as licenses and permits, I should say.
Do you want me to answer it and then you can answer, Dave, if I miss anything? We'll tag team.
Sounds
Okay.
good.
Okay. So, in particular, we are moving to general billing for some things. So the monthly parking ticket system, which is very exciting because right now it's on an old Access database, is moving to the general billing for Tyler. But all the licensing and permitting that is part of Acela, that has parts of the plan review and everything else, will remain in Acela. Because obviously we've invested much city staff resources to this, so we want to continue to use that. But any of those kind of one-offs they don't fit in the Acela world will move to the general billing in Tyler, because that works very well.
And I'm sorry if you already said it and I missed it. What's the expected completion date for that, Sarah?
I believe that they're hoping to have that done by the end of 2024. And this is actually a project that Craig Franklin, our city treasurer, is working on with Parking Utility right now and Tyler. And then we're doing the back end connections.
I appreciate that. Yeah, because I remember hearing that residential parking permits, the annual permits, would eventually be a part of Tyler general billing, but it looked like when I checked on the city website that hadn't occurred yet. But it will be soon, it sounds like. Very good. Thank you. Thank you both very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions for IT? If not, thank you very much, Sarah and Amanda. And we'll go on to sustainability in the mayor's office. And Dr. Price is here.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Jessica Price. I'm the Sustainability and Resilience Manager. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm here to let you know what we have proposed for our 2025 program budget and going forward. So you'll notice that we actually show a decrease in our overall budget of $215,000. That is because we have been successful in securing grant funding to support some of our programs. And so this just reflects a shifting of some of those capital dollars over to grant funds. And then as those grant funds cycle out over the coming years, you'll see the budget go back up. But of course, we are committed to seeking additional grant funding to support the work that we're doing and hope to see continued success. And I would be happy to answer any questions folks have about it.
Thank you, Jessica. Any questions for Jessica? Going once, going twice. Seeing none, thank you. And we'll move on to finance. Dave?
Thank you, Mayor. We'll start with the zoo, actually, and then we'll go to finance, and we'll walk quickly through the cash flow statements for impact fees and TIF districts. So with the zoo, just a reminder, a little bit of background on the relationship between the city and the county on the zoo. So on the operating side, which is not what we're talking about today, the city and county have an agreement that the city will pay 20% of the net cost of operating the zoo. On the capital side, it's basically a voluntary contribution by the city, and each year the city has budgeted $75,000 a year as sort of a contribution towards the capital programs at the zoo. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions about the zoo? Going once, going twice. No questions about the zoo. So we'll go next to finance then.
So finance has one project. This has been in the budget for several years. This is basically an estimate put together through our cost allocation report. As you may recall, we engage an outside party to look at all of the sort of administrative spending in the city, allocate that on various relative bases like number of positions or transactions. And this is the estimated cost of the sort of capital budget, whether it's the putting the budget together or the accounting associated with it. And we fund that cost through the capital budget. And this year, the estimate is $426,000 per year for that overall cost.
Any questions about finance? Seeing none. Dave, you want to walk through the other pieces?
Yep. So we'll start with impact fees. This should be pretty quick. So just a reminder about impact fees. They can all be used for capital costs. They're authorized under state law. It's required that a number of findings and reports be put together to authorize them. We have two major impact fee buckets. One is for engineering type projects. So that would be related to, let's say, a new development on the city's periphery, and a developer will pay impact fees, and those might be used to build streets and other infrastructure on the plat. If Christine can scroll down just a little bit, if you look at it, if we just switch to the engineering, those you can see are in a deficit. That's because the revenues are typically collected after the expenditures have occurred. If you look overall at both parks, the other bundle of impact fee districts are for parks, so park improvements, equipment in parks, and so on, again, in areas where development is occurring around the city. The case of revenues and expenditures for parks is kind of just the opposite as engineering. The development fees are collected, and then parks will spend that out over time on perhaps land acquisition for parks, equipment in parks, development of the parks related to the new development around the city. So you can see a sizable surplus in the parks impact fees, deficits in the engineering, but together there's balance now expected of about $36 million. We won't go through every impact fee or parks fee district, but if you do, you can see which projects in the capital budget are funded from impact fees through each of the various impact fee districts. You also, if you're looking at a project in the capital budget, whether it's for parks or engineering, you may see that as a funding line for specific projects. Namely, it'll be that called out as an impact fee. So that's impact fees. You can switch to the TIDs, tax increment districts. So here, if we kind of start at the beginning, we show these, and again, both of these parts of the budget are not approvals of the budgets. They're just sort of a way to look at the revenues and expenditures and the projects and how they affect expected cash flows in the TIDs. Now, the cash flow in the TIDs comes from tax increment in the tax increment districts. And just a refresher on that, the districts are set up based on the approval of both a council and a joint review board that consists of the taxing jurisdictions in the tax increment district. So that's going to be primarily in the city. It's going to be the Madison Metropolitan School District, the City of Madison, Dane County, and Madison College. So both the city, the city council, and that joint board need to approve the creation of districts. There's a project plan that's created for each district. It has in it expectations of the amounts that will be spent within the district, basically a budget for each district, and then an estimate of the tax increment revenues. And that project plan then drives what ends up in the capital budget. Again, as with impact districts, tax increment has to be used for capital expenditures, not for operating expenditures. So this page that you see before you just summarizes each of the active TIDs in the city, the year it came into existence, the total property value in that district when it was created, its value in 2024, what that value change has been since the district was created, a ratio of the amount of outstanding or debt service to revenues. And you'll see with newer TIDs, that ratio is pretty high. With older TIDs, that ratio is lower. So if you look at Capital Gateway, the first one, which is huge increase in value over the roughly 20 years that district has been in existence. The next column after that is the cash balance. We also look at all of the expected costs and compare it to anticipated revenues. If it's a negative number, meaning if it's in parentheses in that column, that means it has basically exceeded its expected cost. So it's in a positive situation. If it's a positive number, then it's really in a sort of deficit situation. And then the last column is just the amount of capital projects that are proposed to be funded from each of those tax increment districts. Again, and similar to the format for the tax or for the impact districts, impact fee districts, if you look at each of the individual TIDs, if you could scroll down, Christine, you can see this is a summary at the total TID level. If you scroll a little bit further down, that's just the first TID, TID 36, and it just shows the revenues from the increments, the types of expenditures, where we're at, and then the specific projects that are funded with increment in that TID is shown at the bottom of each page. So in this instance, there's that carry forward funding that is approved by a prior council for the public market, and then the build plan, which you can see in the economic development budget for 2025. And those are both funded from cash, basically annual increment in that TID. One other thing I'll point out is a little bit further up, you'll see a line that's listed as other transfer to TID 51. There are a few TIDs that are making transfers of increment from the TID, from this particular TID to the South Madison TID. And some of that's funding some of those projects in the South Madison TID that you heard a little bit about tonight, for example, community development projects. That's a quick overview of the tax increment districts. This is for your information. And, you know, as you take a look at these, we're happy to answer further questions on that.
Thank you, Dave. Alder Figueroa Cole.
Thank you, Mayor. Yep. Dave, what is the balance of the impact fees?
I think the total, if I remember, Christine can put that back up, was about 42 million between the two, or 36 million between the engineering and the parks impact fee districts. So the parks impact fee districts have a surplus of about 42 million. The engineering have basically a deficit of about 6 million. So we account for those together, and there's basically a surplus of $36 million in those impact fee districts.
How long have we had the engineering impact fees?
Many years. I don't know exactly when they came into existence, but impact fees have been a tool for many years.
No, I familiar with the parks. I hadn't noticed that we had an engineering one.
Yeah. So we've had engineering impact fee districts for many years.
And is the engineering impact fee set up kind of the same as parks, but they have their own districts?
Yep, they have districts kind of around areas of development in the city. So I think you'll see one. It looks like Christine's trying to. So this would be in the Door Creek area on the east side of the city. Again, where development is occurring, an impact fee district has been set up. That's in sort of between planning and engineering, and as a parcel of land is platted, and then what sort of development infrastructure needs to go into that plat. And the developer is sort of paying that through the impact fees, and the city is funding those infrastructure costs as those impact fees are collected over time.
Thank you. And then when it comes for the TIF districts, how aren't they supposed to have like a some kind of longevity? Aren't they supposed to be close to a certain age? Like
Right.
the 2005, how many more years would that be open?
Yeah, Christine, if you can go back to TID 36. Most TIDs have a lifespan under state law of a maximum of 27 years. And of that 27 years, 22 years is the maximum in which the expenditures can occur, with the last 5 years sort of being increment collection to pay off costs. Now, the city typically closes districts much faster than that. Christine, if you could scroll up to that list of the TIDs, the page above that. Yeah, that's it. So you can see the year of inception. So for TID 36, for example, it has to close by 2032, and its expenditure period will end in 2027. So about 2 years from now, a year or two from now.
So 2027 end expenditures, and then we give it one more year for affordable housing type of thing? Or is that included?
Yes. No, that's not included in that 27 years. So once the city determines that the TID can be closed, it's recovered all of its costs, then it goes through a process that I think you're familiar with, where a resolution is introduced to keep it open one more year to collect one more year of incremental revenues that can be used for housing purposes. And again, that's authorized under state law. And again, as I pointed out with, TID 36 is a good example, that TID is remaining open to also make donations to TID 51 in South Madison to fund the various projects that are on that South Madison plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any other questions on either the impact fees or the TIF districts? If not, then Christine, anything else that you want to remind folks of this evening?
Nothing for me. Just a reminder that tomorrow's briefings will start with transportation, Monona Terrace, and then all of the public works agencies.
Great. So then a motion to recess would be in order. Anyone wanted to make that? Alder Evers? But we can't hear you still, but I think you said move to recess. And is there a second? Alder Rummel will second. Moved and seconded to recess. This meeting will reconvene tomorrow at 4:30. Is there any objection to recording unanimous vote in favor of going into recess? Seeing none, we are recessed. We'll see you all tomorrow.